Yeah, Charles Hercules Evans, who made Herculean efforts to keep the Dodgers in Brooklyn and did succeed, although he had very small profit margin. But yeah, at one point they wanted to move them. A couple of the owners wanted to move them to Baltimore,
Right.
and almost got away with that. He kind of kept them in by the skin of his teeth, and yeah, that was a nice thing. Yeah, the owners were often closer to, they were early on, they were often ex-ball players,
Hmm.
like Charles Comiskey, uh, things like that. But yeah, you had your hobbyists, you had your, kind of irascible people like Andrew Friedman. But when you all had to be kind of tied in to the power structure, and
Right.
particularly the political power structure in the city.
Oh yeah, the connections between baseball and Tammany Hall are like just like a there's a ton of that material in the book. I really had no idea about those deep seated connections. I did want to talk, and can't
Sure.
get too deep into this about the labor relations aspect of the book. Specifically, the most interesting part to me was about the players' strike of 1890, which leads to the players starting their own league, which I believe is just called the Players League, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it lasts a year. And I liked, I'd heard about this. I think Sports Illustrated ran a short piece on this a couple of years ago. And the question I always have is like, why didn't it work? Like, what went wrong there? And so, could you kind of talk about both how the league started and how it resolved, basically?
Yeah, it's really a fascinating story, and it kind of gets short shrift.
Yeah.
Um, there was this very smart player, guy named John Montgomery Ward, and he on the side had gotten both a bachelor's and a law degree from Columbia, and he kind of knew what he was doing, knew his way around the law, knew his way, and he, like all the players, hated stuff like the reserve clause that were
Right.
coming in, completely illegal, unconstitutional, being imposed on the players by this cartel, which is really what a league is. So they're kind of moving out, crushing any ability of the players to go and sell their services when their contracts ended to the highest bidder. Um, so he secretly manages to form a players union, and they get some concessions, but then the owners quickly try to put back in the reserve clause.
Uh-huh.
So Ward's ready for this, and he breaks away. He gets the vast majority of the great players in the game, and he gets some backers, financial backers from outside, and they start competitive franchises. So
Mhm.
at New York at this point, it had its all-time record of major league teams. It had five teams in
Yeah.
the three leagues, so three in Brooklyn and two in New York. So, uh, and this is really a threat to organized baseball as it then was. They basically mortally wound one of the two major leagues, the American Association, which goes out of business like 2 years later. And they're really hurting the National League. They're on the verge of taking it down. But the National League plays a very clever game of what they call bluff, whereby they kind of keep putting out these false statements for what they're making, and they manage to thus bluff a lot of the financial backers of the Players League into settling. So they either get, they get to be owners of National League teams or part owners, or they get cash settlements and they walk away from the Players League, so it collapses. But it's a really close thing, and it's fascinating to me how different all of our outlook at sports might be if they had succeeded. I think it's really a shame. It's one of those great missed opportunities in
Oh,
American history.
yeah, absolutely. It's like a major what if, and I think the revelation in the book that this really like it wasn't like it was insolvent. It wasn't like it was a new league.
Oh yeah,
It was struggling. Like it had, but all
yeah, it
the
was
leagues
struggling. Yeah,
like the American Association, like all these leagues sort of were always on the precipice of falling apart. And so the
yeah,
Players League
yeah.
was not really exempt from that, but it was perfectly sustainable. It was just this sort of this crazy bluff game that the National League played to kind of get the financial backers to sort of lose their nerve, kind of basically to just sort of pull the funding. And how, if it had worked, you wonder like would the future of all professional sports be
Yeah,
just before the NBA and the NFL and all, like where could these all have been worker owned or worker run organizations, given that the Players League seemingly was viable in its one excuse me, one
oh,
year of existence.
definitely. And another thing about it which is really interesting, is that Ward wanted to drop the color line. He wanted
Yeah.
to invite black ball players into the new union in the league too. And sadly, horribly, the players said no.
Yeah.
So which is their loss as well. But that was too bad. But boy, that could have been something to have seen that.
Yeah, you
It's
just
a
wonder
great
like
moment.
what could it have been? Because it just, yeah,
Yeah,
if you get it, if you change something small or not even small, but something like
yeah,
at such an early stage, like the whole sort of what if aspect of it becomes fascinating to think about.
yeah. It could have been a great example for empowering workers right
Oh
there
yeah.
at the ballpark.
Yeah, on that note, I wanted to talk a little bit about how, the that because the book, I focus on the 1890 example because it's such a crazy thing that I think
Mhm.
most fans don't know about,
Yeah.
and as you say, it's this big what if. But there's lots of little stories in the book about disputes between workers and
Oh
players
yeah,
and their owners, and that's
yeah,
like a recurring theme throughout, obviously, baseball history and sports history and American history. And so I'm curious if there was anything that you like noticed in the course of doing, finding all these stories. Like, this is also a time of growing like labor agitation in the US, this late 19th
yes,
century to
very
the
much
beginning of
so.
the 20th century. So I'm curious if there's any like, correlation between those two things. If there's any, you also have this like the immigrant population of workers, which is, in, other industries is a source of radicalism. And so I'm curious if that's something that, am I overfitting that? Is it too, or is there a real
No,
connection
no,
there?
it's very much the case, and it's very true. And as I was saying, like a league is really a cartel. And
Yeah.
as far as I could determine, the National Association, which is the first major league, starts in 1871. As far as I could determine, could be wrong, but that was the first league anywhere ever. You just didn't
Uh-huh.
have them before,
Yeah.
and not in foreign countries, not in America. Uh, and they start this, and really that it's a way of monopolizing things.
Yeah.
You have the rules, other people don't get to play you, they're left out of this. um, and they were fairly bad at it. They were couldn't kind of keep it together, and so after about 6 seasons, 5 seasons, it goes belly up. But then you have these other monopolies or cartels that come about, and again, that's the way the industry builds power for itself, but all too often to the detriment of the fans of the cities they're playing in. Um, Although again, as long as they need kind of the approval of the political machines,
Right.
they kind of have to operate to those demands.
Yeah.
You know, and if they don't go along with Tammany Hall, if they're not well connected to Tammany Hall, the machine will drive a street through their ballpark.
Yeah.
Get out of there. So it's not. And Tammany Hall is there's many bad things about it, but it's nice that they like asserted the people's power to that degree, or the politicians' power. I mean, it would have been nice to see New York politicians when the Mets and Yankees demanded yet another new stadium.
Right.
Uh, it would have been nice to see some of our leaders who proclaim how wonderfully enlightened and liberal they are at every turn. Would have been nice to see them have certain demands.
Yeah.
Like you want a new stadium or a lot of subsidies toward it. Fine. You can't rip out 10,000 seats for luxury boxes.
Yeah.
But of course, nobody made that demand, and
Yeah.
the game got more expensive and exclusive than ever.